We have a really awesome speaker who's going to give a great talk today. Her name is Nandini Santanam, and she's a senior engineering manager at Docker. And her talk is going to be about the value of diverse experiences. So please help me welcoming Nandini to the stage.
Thanks, Karen. Good afternoon. My name is Nandini, and I manage an engineering team at Docker. I've been an engineer and subsequently a manager for a while now, and I really, really enjoy being in the tech industry and solving some interesting problems. Today, I'm here to talk about something completely different, about how diverse experiences shape every one of us. And to be honest, this is completely outside my comfort zone. I wasn't even sure what I would talk about it. And then I did some research, some digging, and I actually also brainstormed with a couple of people from my team and thought a bit about my own past experiences and figured this was actually the right place to be. There are a lot of conversations happening about diversity nowadays. There are a lot of articles written for and against certain aspects. Some schools of thought think we do too much about diversity. There are others that think we do too little. Although the reality is that a lot of workplaces continue being homogeneous. Let's start with a couple of pictures. When I go to my favorite e-commerce website and search for toddler girl shirts, I see this. When I search for toddler boy shirts, I see this. As the parent of a toddler girl, there are aspects about these pictures that jump out and concern me. It bothers me that girls are not associated with bears and dinosaurs, or boys with a rainbow. If you walk into a store and look for words associated with girls, those words would be love, pretty, smile, happy, clouds. And words that are associated with boys are strong, brave, rad, curious, handsome. If you think about it a bit, this means that we are shutting out parts of the world from people that will run the world. Civilization has rarely progressed from conventional thinking and herd mentality. People that make a change are people that dare to think differently. These are people that challenge assumptions and are willing to explore the unexplored. These are a set of inventions and discoveries that have happened over the last 25 centuries. Every single invention or discovery listed here represents a milestone in the world. And if you look at the contributors, be it individuals or teams, these were people that thought differently. They were not afraid of saying no and not reaching consensus. And they worked through the chaos to create magic. The result? The world as we knew it before the milestone was completely different from the world after. Each invention here marked a change in the world and set its course in a completely new direction. The discovery listed in 1821 is a particularly interesting one for all of us. It was a slow ramp up from the discovery of semiconductor materials to the first transistor that was built in 1957. Digital technology has taken off and taken over most of the world since then, and in a really, really small way, brought us all together in this room to talk about diversity. So since we're all here, let's start with the basics. What is diversity? It turns out diversity is actually a lot of things. It starts with the most obvious pieces. We are all different physiologically. There are aspects about us, race, gender, age, which are things that we are born with and make us unique. This is called inherent diversity. If you look around you, you see people that do different things. In a tech company, for instance, you have engineers, product managers, designers, people in finance, sales, HR, and many more functions. As you grow up, you tend to gravitate towards certain roles or functions depending on your skill set, your desire, and ability. This is called diversity in skill set, and is probably one of the most organized facets of diversity in the workforce today. There is a third kind, which is more harder to map against known quantities. This is diversity in thought or cognitive diversity. Let me start with an example here. Sarah and Jill are two members in a team. Sarah likes to get things done really quickly, and Jill is more measured. When Sarah and Jill join a team, they work with each other and they don't really understand why the other person is the way they are. The truth is, Sarah likes getting things done quickly and takes certain shortcuts, and Jill wants to make sure everything is perfect. By themselves, these skills are pretty awesome, but together they are really, really valuable. If you had a product that had to go through a lot of quick iterations and then work on a refined version that really, really needed to be thought through, then you would need Sarah and Jill working together and complementing each other. To give you a flavor of diversity or what happens when there is no diversity, let's also look at a few examples. By now, we have established there are different kinds of diversity and that there is diversity in skill set, which is actually honed pretty well in the tech industry. So why do we even need other kinds of diversity, and why are we talking about it? Let's take a look. From 1960 through 2011, female drivers were 47% more likely to get injured by a car crash. The reason was because regulators did not take most women into account when codifying car safety laws. They had two dummies that were used for car crash tests, and both of these were representative of 95th percentile of the male population and 5th percentile female. So if you were a woman, or if you were under 5 feet 3 inches and less than 135 pounds, you were more likely to get injured. The law was changed in 2011, but we still have 50 years of catching up to do. Voice recognition software started out as inherently biased and was purely tuned towards native English speakers. So if you were a non-native English speaker, even if you spoke perfectly idiomatic English, it wouldn't recognize you because you had an accent. Things have changed since then, and today, if I say, Siri, call home, Siri actually calls home, which is great. What's more interesting is that facial recognition software continues being biased. In 2017, earlier this year, a researcher discovered that some of the core libraries that are used for facial recognition do not consider darker skin tones. Note that none of these are malicious or intentional. All of these happened because you did not see certain kinds of people around you, so you did not realize they existed. Many of you must have heard about Blockbuster. Blockbuster started as an American chain and expanded into Europe after buying out several competitors. At its peak, Blockbuster had 84,000 employees, and yet 6 years later, it filed for bankruptcy. The reasons could be attributed to large size, so they couldn't adapt, inertia, entropy, but the reality was that Blockbuster had an online division. It's just that none of its key decision makers were aligned with the online idea. So even though they had the resources, the brains, and the muscle to reinvent themselves, they perished because of lack of diversity in thought. So now that we've looked at the pitfalls of lack of diversity, let's look at the benefits. Diversity provokes thought. When you're in a group of people that are dissimilar, people tend to disagree, and that makes sure you put more thought into your argument. This is a conflict of ideas, not personalities, and this is great because it forces you to think through and come up with a better solution. Thinking drives conversation. In a study done by a few universities, a group of 350 students were subdivided into groups and asked to discuss a prevalent social issue. It was observed that when a black student presented a dissenting argument to a group of white students and vice versa, the dissenting argument was perceived as more novel and led to a lot more brainstorming and better conclusions drawn. Opposed to that, if there was a homogeneous group, the dissenting argument tended to be ignored. We have a phrase that's in Hindi, one of the languages I speak, which is "Ghar ki murgi dal barabar," which transliterated means exactly this, which says, if you have a dissenting argument from someone that looks like you, you'd most likely ignore it. Conversation leads to change. In another study, there were mock trials conducted, and groups of 6 jurors, or multiple groups of 6 jurors were, the group was divided into multiple groups of 6 jurors. The diverse groups ended up making fewer errors. They discussed a lot more aspects about the case, and they were okay discussing the more sensitive issues like gender or race. So how does this map to more material benefits? Organizations that end up changing evolve, and organizations that evolve survive. The Center for Talent Innovation conducted a groundbreaking study and concluded that if organizations embraced diversity and had diverse hiring practices, companies were 48% more likely to expand, as opposed to 33% when companies did not embrace diversity. When it came to penetrating new markets, it was even more marked. Companies that promoted diversity expanded to newer markets at the rate of 46% versus companies that did not. There were only 28% of companies that did expand. So now that we've talked about diversity, different kinds of diversity, how would you and I go about acquiring this diversity? One way I can think about it is looking back at my own career trajectory, which is nonlinear to say the least. What I've seen is that the hardest part about any transition I've made has been to convince people that I'm up for the challenge. The first red line I have here, which was a transition from one industry to another, was interestingly hard. From my perspective, this was just about programming in one language and one technology stack versus something else. But it was a really hard sell and had a lot of rejection emails at the outset. I have an interesting anecdote that happened. So I had a lot of mentions of the word chip in my resume. And when I substituted the word chip for digital systems and components, the rejection rate dramatically lowered. I was working on a chip, which was a video compression chip, and I had no idea how that would map to digital systems and components, but it eliminated the bias that people would have had against a hardware background. Diversity also has a very pleasant side effect. It makes you incredibly self-confident. One of the pitches I started as soon as I pivoted was to go to every interview that I would, and if someone asked me, hey, you've not really done this, how do you know you can do it? The only answer I would have is, I get a kick out of doing things that I've never done before. And somehow that's worked so far. So how did I use my past to shape my present? Here's a picture of my team that I work with right now. This is a very diverse team, and it is much more than the color of my skin or my gender. The people in this team are from the US, from Europe, South America, and Asia. There are engineers and other folks with a 4-year college degree and other engineers that have gone through a boot camp. There are people with a 4-year degree in something that's completely unrelated and have picked up CS along the way. Working with this team has been a privilege, and it has been one of the best professional experiences that I've had so far, and it has been a lot of fun. Given that there is a lot of benefits to diversity, there's still a lot of inertia. People tend to gravitate towards individuals that are similar to you. If you're looking at a hard day, then it is easier to talk to someone that looks like you, that talks like you, and that that has a lesser tendency to disagree with you. Globalization has also meant an explosion of cultures and languages. So if you have a group of people that come from different cultures, there is a lot of possibility that you could say something that could get completely misconstrued. This has also been a cause or a natural barrier towards adding more diversity, or so there are some schools of thought. There is an upfront investment to diversity. So at some point, you might think that it is easier to just give all of this up because you don't see any return immediately. And on most days, if you had to choose between coming up with an awesome solution after a lot of conflict or coming up with an okay solution with minimal conflict, chances are you choose the latter. In our case, how did we go through and overcome this inertia and come up with this team? For starters, we celebrate the strength of every new member that is part of the team. Whenever someone comes in for an interview, I tend to ask the same question to all of them. This is a technical take-home question, and it is tailored so that it does not require any prior knowledge of algorithms. Though I do ask the same question, I do not expect the same answer. The answer depends on every single person that takes home the question. It depends on whether or not they've worked before, whether they've seen similar problems before, or whether they have the ability to adapt to new problems. We also translate this into our panel interviews. If an interviewee comes in, say, without the knowledge of distributed queuing system, we expect the candidate to infer such a solution. We do not expect them to know about it at the outset and disqualify them because they did not know what they did not know. I also try to tie this back to my own experience. Whenever someone has given me the chance to try something new, I've exerted myself and pushed myself to do better. And I try to do the same thing with every team member. It's common sense. Everyone wants to prove themselves, so they just need the space to grow. Plus, this also puts the onus on individuals rather than bottlenecking the decisions that a team needs to make on one person or a few people. And it has really helped grow people and ensure that the team is efficient in the longer term. So in my pursuit so far, there have been some things that have been great. Coding boot camps are a pretty new wave. We have a couple of boot camps, or I think 3 or 4 in the San Francisco Bay Area. We at Docker, I think we've recruited about 4 or 5 engineers from these boot camps. There are 2 engineers from coding boot camps in my team. The boot camps are interesting because they are a 3 to 9 month course in computer science as opposed to a 4-year college degree. We've also ensured that in the team we go through cycles of candid feedback. It is really critical to make sure that the really quiet people also speak up, because they are the ones that have a lot of ideas, but which may or may not get heard. Making sure that these feedback cycles actually got acted upon and reviewed has also helped sustain the momentum. Having fun or making fun a priority has also been important. We're all at work 40 to 60 hours a week, and just like productivity is important, fun is important as well. If you're in a diverse team, having team building activities or having activities outside of work really helps because it is an organic way to get to know team members outside of your work environment. And that fun has also translated into having fun at work. This unconscious bias training was something that I completely did not expect would work. I'm always skeptical about having 1-hour training sessions, and I wasn't really sure what I would learn from it. But the reality was that I actually learned a lot from it, and it helped implement some of these practices that we've had in the team. Now to some of the pitfalls. Trying to embrace diversity involves a conscious time commitment, and that has been a barrier in multiple cases. It is like setting up a routine and making sure that you consciously invest time and commit to certain activities. Embracing diversity is not like instant noodles. You cannot just say you want a diverse team and then it happens right away. It takes time, so you have to believe in it and make sure you continue working towards it until the shift happens. A third and more nebulous issue is the lack of metrics when it comes to individual teams. We have proved that diversity and productivity are causal when it comes to larger groups and industries. But within a team or a group of individuals, it's been up and down for me. So my voice is heard, and that makes the team better. I've had a hard time making the shift from A to B or phrasing it in a metrics-driven fashion. Over the last 25 minutes, we've talked about diversity, what it is, and what I've done and what my team has done to promote it. This is a group of people that is probably divided into individual contributors. There are hiring managers, solutions architect, and people from sales. One obvious question that comes up is, what can you do if you're not a hiring manager? Turns out, there is a lot you could do. For starters, have lunch. Have lunch with a colleague that's probably not in your team or someone that's not like you. Even if you do this once a month, it is 1 hour more and 1 hour of conscious learning that you did not have before. I have an engineering background, and until I started talking to people that were outside my immediate circle, I had no idea how different kinds of roles made a company succeed. When you're interviewing, you go through a resume, and most resumes contain school, experience, current workplace, courses. My suggestion would be to not over-index on school and where someone works, and focus on what they've done. If you focus on projects that someone has done, whether they display the aptitude to adapt to different kinds of problems, and if you see if there is a good fit in terms of someone that you would like to work with, those are great metrics to make sure someone can be a part of your team. Do not fall into the relevant experience trap where you end up disqualifying someone because they did not solve a problem exactly like the way you expected them to. Once these folks become part of your team, make sure the quiet ones speak up. It is important for these folks to also have their voice heard, and the immediate side benefit, it makes you a leader, which is great. Also know that once you have a diverse team, you're bound to have differences in personalities, and conflict of ideas. Keep in mind that this is not personal. This is a conflict of ideas, which is great. And this means it is going to force you to be objective about different tasks and thoughts and eventually come up with a better solution. So we've spent the last 30 minutes talking about diversity, and hopefully you've had some interesting anecdotes and stories to take back with you. Change is always hard. The best kinds of change that happen are changes that are more organic and gradual. So if you had one thing to take away from today, what would that be? Start small and sustain it. Every single drop counts. Thank you. So I also intentionally had my talk timed to 25 minutes so that we could discuss and actually have more of a conversation. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or we could just brainstorm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering, for candidates you interview, do they typically ask about diversity or if your team is diverse?
No, so far I haven't seen people ask about it. But what we've done is to make sure there's a panel that is diverse. So we have people that have different levels of experiences to make sure that the candidate gets a full range of who's part of the team.
Okay, thank you. Do you have the behaviours that you expect people to exhibit in your organisation? Do you have them written down somewhere? Are they clear?
No, that's a good question, and the answer is not right now. Karen would probably know better. No, it's something that
I'm looking at Karen's face, and that says no.
Okay, it's actually something
or
that
possibly deer in the headlights. Yeah.
So it's something that we've put a lot of thought into. Personally, I think one of the people that I would credit this to is my manager, who's really helped codify a lot of these things. So we're trying to do this more as an example and trying to spread the culture. I would say across Docker, we should probably start doing something that is written down.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
So you talked a little bit about making sure that those that are quiet, making sure their voices get heard. Can you share tips and tricks on ways to get people to share?
That's a good question. So a couple of things. One is whenever we have a meeting, it could be either a demo meeting or a stand-up or just a team meeting to go through several tasks. We make sure it's a no laptop, no cell phone meeting so that people don't end up hiding behind their electronic devices. And then actually going around the table to walk through every single person and make sure they talk. What I've seen is that initially the quiet ones tend to talk very little, so it's mostly maybe a yes or a no. And then through one-on-ones where we talk a bit more, and then it's a more gradual process. So it's a mixture of one-on-ones, conversation with other team members, and then a gradual ramp up to actually speaking up more in team meetings.
Aside from hiring from boot camps, what strategies have you used for finding diverse candidates?
Probably taking a really hard look at our job posting. So you know what they say about rock stars, A+, and all of that. It's I never realized that was true until I saw that was true. So trying to really make sure that job postings are free of certain phrases. so that people do not get intimidated by the posting. And which it also means that there's a really wide net of people that end up applying, and then just going through each resume to make sure that's someone that we want to talk to.
Are there any particular places where you advertise or things like that? Because, I mean, I guess being as big as Docker, you probably have a lot of people who just come and find your
so far, it's that's a good point. So far, it's been very organic. And we mostly end up advertising on the careers page and then going through referrals.
And I think also, if I remember correctly, our HR team goes to the Grace Hopper conference as well. Right. So we do attend some things.
In diverse teams, you can have people which have different mindsets and different characters. What are your strategies if you find out either you hate a people or a person or have something against them or vice versa? And besides talking about it, if you find out there's barriers it seems you can't cross, besides firing them or quitting yourself?
So that's a good point. So it's never come to that. There are personality clashes that happen. And what I've done in those cases so far is to make sure they actually work on the same task. Because if you force people in the same room together, they're forced to talk more. And that has ended up helping. Other than that, just during our one-on-ones, we actually end up talking about what happened and really trying to distill that into a very objective reason why an argument happened and trying to separate that from a personality issue. And I agree, I've not seen very extreme cases so far. I'll have to find out what I'll do if I see something too super extreme.
For people who may not work on diverse teams and who aren't in a position where they're hiring people, how would you tell them to influence their managers to make their team more diverse?
That's actually a good question. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot because the short answer is I don't know yet. The longer answer is trying to... So if there's a hiring manager that I would like to influence, I'd probably try and talk to them a bit more about how having a diverse team helps. Again, going into some of the negative aspects that are thrown around about diversity, I would also try to establish that diversity and charity are very different because people that are being given an opportunity do not want that opportunity to be handed to them. So I think that would probably be one big argument that I would try and make.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.